Welcome to Mission Majjhima, Ajahn.
Ajahn.
So tell us about Majjhima 74, the Dīghanakha Sutta.
So this discourse to Dīghanakha, which literally means long nails, a great name, is actually quite important to situate in terms of the Buddha's teaching and Venerable Sariputta's life. By all accounts, it occurred about 2 weeks after Venerable Sariputta went forth into the holy life. And the account of that is recorded elsewhere, where he had made a pact with Moggallana, the other chief disciple, Mahamoggallana, the other chief disciple of the Buddha, before they were ordained, that when one of them discovered the path to the deathless, they would tell the other. And Venerable Sariputta was in, I think named Upatissa at the time, was in a town and saw a monk named Venerable Assaji wandering for alms with beautiful comportment, and was so inspired by his visage that he asked who was his teacher and received a brief teaching which was enough to bring him to stream entry, the first level of enlightenment. So a beautiful teaching, story, and recollection of how important it is to take care with our action and how we walk, how we speak. It can be enough to bring someone to the path. Venerable Sariputta and Mahamoggallana at that time, before coming to the Buddhist dispensation, were the disciples of a radical skeptic named Sanjaya, known, one of the teachers known as an eel wriggler in kind of the suttas, where they're unwilling to take any position. And this discourse, which apparently occurred about 2 weeks after Venerable Sariputta goes forth, this is actually recorded in other suttas. It's an account of Dīghanakha coming to speak with the Buddha, with Venerable Sariputta standing behind the Buddha, fanning him. But Dīghanakha also, his views seem very close to Sanjaya, so there's a good chance that Sanjaya, losing two very prominent disciples, Venerable Sariputta and Mahamoggallana, from his dispensation, was a large blow to the community, and Dīghanakha was coming, basically trying to get Venerable Sariputta back, or at least seeing what had drawn him away. So just contextualizing this. And later commentaries say this discourse was the catalyst for the Ovada Patimokkha, this huge gathering of arahants at the beginning of the dispensation, 1250, I believe, on a full moon night, where the Buddha, at the end of it, told them to go teach. So, the sutta, Dīghanakha basically comes and presents his radical skepticism to the Buddha, saying, nothing is acceptable to me, no view. And the Buddha, in a very pithy, but also very incisive way, says, is that view of yours, that nothing is acceptable? Is that acceptable to you? Which is both funny and quite profound, in that radical skepticism is very unreliable as a basis. It's very hard to sustain. And the Buddha basically points this out over the discourse, saying, even someone who says that nothing is acceptable to them, no view is acceptable to them, often they actually end up holding to a view. He says this. But he also says that radical skepticism is actually somewhat far from greed, hatred, and delusion. But he then goes on to talk about how whatever view one holds, or whatever general view one aligns with, whether all things are acceptable, some things are acceptable, no views are acceptable, if one comes to the conclusion only this is true and everything else is false, one will fall into argument. And so one should give up that way of holding a view, this ditthikata, this dogmatic way of aligning with a view. And then he brings Dīghanakha to a very profound and simple teaching of look at the body as just made of porridge, of a mother of flesh, and let go of it. And then look at the mind, and specifically Vedana, feeling, pleasant, painful, neutral, and see these as conditioned, impermanent. And this is enough to basically bring Dīghanakha to stream entry, and he goes for refuge. And very importantly, as Venerable Sariputta is standing behind the Buddha, fanning him, and hears this teaching, and this is the moment when he attains enlightenment. So a profound, beautiful, and yet somewhat simple sutta at the same time. What would you have to draw out of this, Ajahn?
Yeah, so a few things to draw out of this sutta. One is just about the conditionality of disputing, and how the Buddha taught, specifically Dīghanakha, to incline away from disputing. He says that when one obstinately holds to a view, then there will be arguing. When there's arguing, there will be disputing. When there's disputing, there will be distress. When there's distress, then there's harm. In America or Western culture, a lot of, just getting a PhD, you have to defend your thesis. And a lot of our education is built around just entrenching ourselves in particular views and not seeing that actually can be quite a bit of harm to this, especially if you take that honed and sharp mind and you don't have the control of it. You're just using it willy-nilly. You don't have a meta-awareness of how it can actually cause harm to the people who you're wielding it towards. So just useful to note how you're holding on to views and how that affects, is it harming the people around you? The Buddha pointed to that, showing once one doesn't do that, when one doesn't hold on to their views, doesn't argue, doesn't dispute, doesn't cause distress, and doesn't harm other people, it suggests that a mendicant whose mind is freed like this doesn't side with anyone or dispute with anyone. They use the language of the world to communicate without getting stuck on it. So you can use language without harming and without just latching on to the specific vocabulary that you use or even the specifics of your argument. Another thing to note is just, that Sariputta, the Buddha's foremost disciple, would be in wisdom, is doing this very sweet task of physically fanning the Buddha. And this occurs in what's called the Bora's Cave at Kichakut, or the Vulture's Peak. And you can still visit this. There's a small little grotto, a small little indented cave just before you get to the peak of what is now considered Vulture's Peak. And I've meditated there. You probably meditated there. But it's just a little indentation where all of this is said to take place, where the Buddha's meditating. Sariputta is fanning him. And just that act of service is beautiful. And then finally, the language with which Dīghanakha becomes a stream enterer. It's harkens back. It's the exact same language that Anya Kondanya becomes a stream enterer to in the Dhammacakka Sutta. Yang kinchi samudaya dhammang sabantang nirodha dhammanti. So everything which is of a nature to arise is of a nature to cease, which is pretty much the essence that Assaji was teaching Sariputta when Sariputta became a stream enterer. That language which is chanted not just and memorized not just in a Pali tradition, but we've heard it chanted at Tibetan monasteries as well in the Sanskrit version. That is Ye Dhamma Hetu Pabhava Tesang Hetung Tathagata Aha Tesang Chayo Nirodo Evang Vadi Mahasamano. So of those phenomena that arise from a cause, the Tathagata explained their cause and also their cessation, thus teaches the great ascetic. So just a teaching about if we really could truly see the arising and passing away of things, then and realize the extent of that teaching, then that would be stream entry.
I love how you pointed out some of those aspects, and I'll just dovetail on a few of them. One is you pointing out Venerable Sariputta's act of fanning the Buddha, and not just a sweet act, but who knows how much of the fact that Venerable Sariputta attained arahantship at this moment was because of this sort of position of devotion to the Blessed One at that time. And really is a strong, like Ajahn Kovilo, you and I will, when we're listening to teachers we really respect, we'll hold Anjali the whole time. And how powerful is that? It's not just a sign of respect, but it makes things enter more deeply. So something quite profound about the fact that this was the moment serving the Blessed One that Venerable Sariputta attained full awakening. The other thing I wanted to dovetail on is you noting, actually the two other things, is the Buddha speaking about how one does not become caught in language. And it echoes a line he has in Dīghanakha 9, where he says, the Tathagata uses the conventions of the world, but does not get trapped by them, does not misapprehend them. And just, this is the beginning of this fissure between what later became known as conventional truth and ultimate truth. But it's a very fascinating way that the Buddha holds language, and I think is useful to keep in mind for the suttas when you encounter some things that are completely hard to square perfectly. The Buddha did use language in different situations slightly differently. And the final thing I'd point out is just the fact that what you said, this realization at stream entry, yang kinchi samudaya dhammang sabantang nirodha dhammanti, that which is of the nature to arise is of the nature to cease. Joseph Goldstein talks about that line coming into his meditation, and then the next thing that came into his mind being, so why want anything? And he realized this subtle leaning forward into every moment stopped in that moment. And what a simple truth at the heart of the whole teaching that issues into enlightenment, and yet how profound.
So, Ajahn, what is the word of the week?
The word of the week is Arya Savaka. And that's a compound of Arya, which means noble one, and Savaka, which actually is based around the root su, which means to hear. So it's a hearer or a listener. But basically, Arya Savaka together means a noble disciple, a noble listener of the Buddha, an enlightened being.
All right, well, let's incline in that direction.